A man spent 3 years searching for his lost dog, through silence, through cold nights, through roads that led nowhere. But when he finally found him, the dog didn't run back. He just stood there, between two lives. And in that moment, everything the man believed about loyalty began to fall apart. Because sometimes, finding what you lost is where the real pain begins. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Tell me below. A gray morning wind drifted over a quiet lakeside town, carrying the scent of wet wood and distant rain. Ryan Carter moved through it like a man who had forgotten how to belong anywhere. At 35, the former Navy SEAL carried strength the way mountains carry snow, quietly, without needing to prove it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his chest solid beneath a long-sleeved green shirt with camouflage sleeves, worn not for style, but habit. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, a faint stubble shadowing a sharp jawline that seemed carved by years of discipline. His eyes, however, told a different story, steady, watchful, but carrying a weight that never fully rested. War had left him alive. Life afterward had not promised him peace. On the passenger seat of his old pickup truck lay a faded red rubber ball. It was scratched, half deflated, and utterly out of place among the dust and empty wrappers. Yet Ryan never moved it. Some objects were not things. They were anchors. 3 years earlier, his German shepherd Max had disappeared, not died, not given away, simply gone. And that absence had become the quiet gravity shaping everything Ryan did afterward. He drifted from town to town, fixing fences, unloading shipments, doing whatever work would last just long enough to earn gas money, and another chance to keep searching. People had told him to let go. It was only a dog, they said. But those people had never stood in silence beside something that understood them without needing words. Max had. Alder Creek was not a place Ryan intended to stay. It was too calm, too gentle, like a painting left untouched by time. Flower baskets hung outside small shops, their colors soft under the pale sky. The lake stretched wide and still, reflecting the clouds like a quiet mirror. It made Ryan feel like an intruder, a man carrying storms into a place that had forgotten them. He stepped into a small bookstore cafe near the town center, drawn by warmth more than hunger. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old pages. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 40s, June Whitaker. She was slender, with ash-brown hair tied loosely at the back of her neck, pale skin that carried a quiet elegance rather than fragility, and eyes that seemed to listen before they judged. There was something composed about her, the kind of steadiness that came from having seen hardship and choosing softness anyway. Ryan showed her a worn photograph. Max stood in it, black and tan coat, ears upright, amber eyes alert, a powerful chest and disciplined posture that spoke of intelligence and loyalty beyond instinct. June studied the photo longer than most people did. "I might have seen a dog like this," she said slowly, "a few days ago, up near the North Dock." The words didn't sound dramatic, but they landed inside Ryan like a detonation. A teenage boy sitting nearby leaned forward. Noah, about 15, lean, with sandy blonde hair falling into his eyes and a restless energy in the way he moved. He pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly before turning the screen toward Ryan. "There," he said. The image was grainy, taken at dawn. Mist hovered over the wooden dock, and at the far edge, barely more than a silhouette, stood a German shepherd, still alert, facing the water as if waiting. Ryan didn't need clarity. He knew that posture. His chest tightened, not with hope, but with something more dangerous. Recognition. The rest of the day blurred into fragments of conversation. A jam vendor with flour-dusted hands mentioned seeing a large dog heading toward the birchwoods. A supply store owner recalled an older man buying premium dog food, always in cash, always alone. A silent child drew a chalk figure of a tall man with a beard, standing beside a dog with pointed ears. Each piece was small. Together, they pointed north. By late afternoon, Ryan followed a narrow dirt road lined with pale birch trees. The town disappeared behind him, replaced by quiet and the faint hum of wind through branches. Then, the cabin appeared. Old wood, low roof, a porch that had seen many seasons, and beneath its shadow, a German shepherd lay resting. Ryan stopped breathing. Time didn't slow. It simply stopped. The dog lifted its head, black and tan fur, thicker than before, a faint scar near one ear, amber eyes that locked onto him with a depth that made everything else disappear. "Max," Ryan whispered. The name felt fragile leaving his lips, like something that might break if spoken too loudly. The dog stood. It took 2 steps toward him. Ryan's hand trembled as he moved forward, every instinct pulling him closer, every memory rising like a tide he couldn't hold back. Then, the dog stopped. Its ears shifted slightly. Its gaze flicked past Ryan. Slowly, it turned its head, toward the cabin behind it. The door creaked open. An older man stepped out. Late 60s, perhaps early 70s. Tall in a way that came not from strength, but endurance. His frame was lean, shoulders slightly bent by time, silver hair falling loosely around a weathered face. A trimmed gray beard outlined a jaw that had once been strong and remained stubborn. His skin was lined, not with weakness, but with years lived fully and quietly. His eyes were steady, observant, carrying the calm of someone who had learned to survive without asking for help. He rested one hand against the doorframe, studying Ryan without hostility. And the dog, Max, did not move toward Ryan. It stood between them, not lost, not waiting, choosing where it belonged. The air inside the cabin was warmer than expected, thick with the scent of aged wood, brewed coffee, and something softer, like the quiet presence of a life lived slowly. Ryan stepped in without speaking, his boots leaving faint traces of dust on the worn wooden floor, while the German shepherd remained near the doorway, positioned not as a guard, but as a silent witness to what was unfolding between 2 men. Rowan Hale moved with a deliberate calm that came from years of learning to conserve energy rather than waste it. Up close, he looked older than he had from a distance, his skin weathered and lined deeply around the eyes, his silver beard trimmed but uneven, as if he cared more about function than appearance. His hands, however, told the truth of his life, calloused, steady, and still capable. There was no tremor in them when he poured coffee into 2 mismatched cups and set one down in front of Ryan. "You found your way here," Rowan said, his voice low, rough like gravel softened by time. It was not a question. Ryan nodded once, his gaze drifting briefly toward the dog. "That's my dog." The words came out firmer than he felt. Rowan didn't argue. He simply leaned back slightly against the edge of the table, crossing one arm over his chest. "Was," he corrected quietly. "Not cruel, not defensive, just precise." The word hung between them. Ryan clenched his jaw, the sharp line of his face tightening as something inside him resisted that correction. He had spent 3 years refusing to say "was." Saying it now felt like surrendering a part of himself he had kept alive through sheer will. Max, no, the dog, shifted its weight, moving closer to the center of the room. Its ears flicked once, eyes moving between the 2 men, reading the tension the way only a trained, intelligent animal could. 6 years old now, maybe a little older. Its body was strong, its coat thick and well kept. The black and tan pattern still vivid despite faint scars marking a past that had not been gentle. Ryan noticed those scars immediately. "Who hurt him?" he asked, his voice dropping. "No one here," Rowan replied. "He came that way." There was no defensiveness in the answer, only fact. Ryan sat down slowly, his large frame folding into the chair with controlled restraint. He wrapped his hand loosely around the coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it as if grounding himself in something tangible. "Tell me," he said. Rowan studied him for a moment, as though deciding how much truth this man could carry. "End of winter," he began. 3 years back. Found him on the road past the birch line. Snow still on the ground, wind sharp enough to cut through bone. He was skin and ribs, limping, wouldn't let me get within 10 feet. Ryan's grip tightened slightly around the cup. "He stayed there," Rowan continued, glancing briefly toward the dog. "Didn't run, didn't follow, just stayed. Like he was waiting for something that wasn't coming." The words landed heavier than any accusation. Ryan lowered his gaze, the memory hitting him not as an image, but as a feeling, an absence he had never been able to explain. "I left food," Rowan said. "Same spot, every day. Took near a week before he touched it while I was still in sight. Another week before he came closer." The dog shifted again, stepping quietly across the floor until it stood near Rowan's side. Not pressed against him, not dependent, but aligned. Familiar. Ryan watched that movement closely. "He slept outside the door for a month," Rowan added. "Didn't matter how cold it got. Wouldn't come in. Just lay there, head up, watching the road." Ryan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the room. "He thought I'd come back," Ryan said, more to himself than to Rowan. Rowan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Silence filled the space, not empty, but full of understanding. Neither man wanted to speak aloud. Ryan finally lifted his eyes again, meeting Rowan's gaze directly. "I didn't leave him." It wasn't a defense. It was a truth that mattered more to him than anything else. Rowan gave a small nod. "I figured." That simple acknowledgement loosened something inside Ryan. Not enough to heal, but enough to breathe. The dog moved then. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped away from Rowan and approached Ryan. Its head lowered slightly, not submissive, but cautious, testing, remembering. It stopped within arm's reach. Ryan didn't move immediately. Every instinct in him screamed to grab hold, to pull the dog close, to reclaim what had been lost. But another part, the part shaped by discipline, by years of learning when not to act, held him still. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice softer now, worn at the edges. The dog's ears tilted forward. Ryan extended his hand, palm open, fingers steady, despite the tension running through his arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dog stepped closer. Its nose brushed against his hand. A small contact, brief, electric. Ryan's breath caught. Recognition. Not explosive, not overwhelming, but there. The dog lingered for a second longer, then pulled back and looked over its shoulder. At Rowan. That glance was quiet, but it said everything. Ryan felt it like a blow he couldn't block. "This isn't just my dog anymore," he said, the realization settling into his voice like weight. Rowan didn't answer right away. He walked over to the small stove, adjusting the flame beneath a dented kettle, giving the moment space to exist. "No," he said finally. "It isn't." Ryan leaned back slightly, running a hand over his jaw, the rough stubble scraping against his palm. His eyes stayed on the dog, watching the way it moved, the way it carried itself, no longer lost, no longer broken, alive and anchored. Ryan had imagined this moment for years. In every version, the dog would run to him, loyalty snapping back into place, like a chain pulled tight. But life wasn't a chain. It was something messier, something that changed. "I'm not here to take him by force," Ryan said after a while, his voice steadier now. That's not how this works. Rowan turned slightly, studying him again, this time with something close to respect. Good, he said, because that wouldn't end well for anyone. The dog lay down between them then, not beside Rowan, not beside Ryan, but in the space that separated them. Neutral ground, shared ground. Ryan looked at it for a long moment, then nodded, almost to himself. I'll be back tomorrow, he said quietly. He stood, placing the untouched coffee cup back on the table, and walked toward the door. The dog didn't follow. It didn't stop him either. It just watched. As Ryan stepped out into the fading light, the cold air hit him like clarity. He paused on the porch, glancing once more toward the doorway. Inside, the dog remained where it was, not lost, not waiting, living. And for the first time in 3 years, Ryan understood something that hurt more than the loss itself. Finding him didn't mean getting him back. The morning light over Alder Creek came in thin and pale, like something hesitant to fully arrive. Ryan Carter had not slept much. He sat in his truck outside the cafe before it opened, elbows resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. At 35, he had endured long nights before, nights in unfamiliar terrain, nights where silence meant danger. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that forced a man to face what he could not control. Inside his chest, something had shifted. Not broken, not healed, just changed. When the cafe door finally opened, June Whitaker stepped out first, tying her hair back with practiced ease. She wore a soft gray sweater that hung lightly over her slender frame, her posture straight but relaxed. There was a steadiness in her movements, the kind that came from years of choosing patience over reaction. She noticed Ryan immediately, not with surprise but with recognition, as if she had expected him to be there. "You look like a man who stayed up arguing with himself," she said gently. Ryan exhaled, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Didn't win." June nodded, as though that made perfect sense. "Those are the ones that matter." He followed her inside, the warmth wrapping around him again, but it didn't settle the tension in his chest. It only made it easier to feel. "I found him," Ryan said. June poured coffee without looking up. "I figured you would." "He's not mine anymore." That made her pause. She turned slightly, her pale eyes studying him, not with pity, but with care. "That's harder than not finding him," she said. Ryan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Before June could say anything more, the door behind them opened again. The woman who stepped in did not belong to Alder Creek. Celeste Monroe carried herself like someone who had never learned to lower her voice because she had never needed to. Early 30s, tall, with a slender, carefully maintained figure, her blonde hair fell in smooth waves over a tailored cream coat that looked too expensive for a town like this. Her skin was flawless in a way that suggested effort rather than ease, and her eyes, sharp, calculating, moved quickly across the room before settling on Ryan. There was history in that look, not warmth, not anger, something colder. "Ryan," she said. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. June stepped back without a word, giving them space. Celeste approached with quiet confidence, her heels making soft, precise sounds against the wooden floor. "I didn't think I'd find you here," she said, though her tone suggested she had known exactly where to look. Ryan turned fully toward her, his expression hardening slightly, the sharp lines of his face becoming more pronounced. "You didn't look very hard before." The words were not loud, but they carried weight. Celeste's lips pressed together briefly, then relaxed into something that resembled composure. "I saw the article," she said, "about the dog." Ryan said nothing. "I didn't expect it to matter anymore," she continued, her voice lowering just enough to suggest something close to vulnerability, but not quite reaching it. I thought, after everything. You thought wrong, Ryan said. There it was. The edge. Celeste inhaled slowly, steadying herself. For a moment, the carefully constructed exterior slipped, revealing something underneath. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the faint shadow of regret. But it didn't stay long. I didn't come here to argue, she said. Then why are you here? A pause. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to him. Because if that dog is still alive, people are going to ask questions. Ryan's brow furrowed slightly. What kind of questions? Celeste hesitated, and that hesitation told Ryan everything. What did you do? He asked, his voice quieter now, but far more dangerous. She shook her head quickly. Nothing like that. He wasn't safe, Ryan. He was aggressive. He wouldn't let anyone near me, or... He was protecting you, Ryan cut in, the words sharp. Celeste's composure cracked, just enough. No, she said, more forcefully now. He was out of control, and I had to make a decision. Ryan stepped closer, his presence filling the space in a way that made her take a half step back without realizing it. What decision? He asked. Silence stretched between them. Then, I told him to take the dog, she said quietly. Ryan didn't blink. Who? He asked. Celeste swallowed. Daniel. The name landed like a stone. Ryan remembered him. Tall, well-dressed, always smiling too easily. The kind of man who shook hands like he was already calculating what you were worth. The man Celeste had chosen after Ryan left for his last deployment. What did he do with Max? Ryan asked. Celeste's eyes dropped just for a second, and that was enough. He drove him north, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. Said he'd take him to a shelter. Ryan waited. She didn't finish. Say it, Ryan said. Her hands tightened at her sides. He didn't, she admitted. He got scared. The dog kept reacting, so he let him out, on the road. The cafe seemed to go silent. Ryan stood very still. 3 years, 3 winters, 3 years of searching. And it had started with something that simple, not fate, not tragedy, a decision, a careless one. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, a slow breath moving through him, not explosive, not violent, but heavy. When he opened them again, something had changed. Not rage, clarity. He survived anyway, Ryan said. Celeste looked at him, unsure what to say. Ryan stepped back, putting space between them. You don't need to worry about questions, he continued. No one's coming after you. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but there was no relief in his voice. Because whatever mattered, he added quietly, already walked away from you. Celeste flinched, not from the words themselves, but from the truth inside them. She didn't stay long after that. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded final. Ryan stood there for a moment, then turned back toward the counter. June was watching him, not intrusively, not sympathetically, but with a kind of quiet understanding. You okay? She asked. Ryan nodded once, not because he was, but because there was nothing else to say. Later that afternoon, he drove back toward the cabin. The road felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. When he reached the clearing, Max was already outside, waiting, not for a command, not for permission, just there. And for the first time since finding him, Ryan didn't see a dog caught between 2 lives. He saw something else. A survivor. The sky over Alder Creek softened into gold as evening settled, the lake catching the last light like a memory refusing to fade. Ryan Carter stood at the edge of the cabin clearing, his boots planted firmly in the dirt, yet something inside him no longer felt anchored. At 35, he had made decisions under pressure, under fire, under the kind of stakes that left no room for doubt. But this This quiet moment in a fading day demanded something far harder. It demanded restraint. Max was already outside. The German Shepherd stood near the porch, body still and balanced, ears upright, amber eyes tracking Ryan with calm awareness. Up close, the signs of time and survival were clearer now. Fine scars beneath the fur along his shoulder, a slightly thicker chest from years of steady care, and a steadiness in his stance that spoke not of training, but of experience. This was no longer a dog waiting for commands. This was a creature that had learned to decide. Rowan Hale stepped out behind him, slower than before. The older man carried himself with the same quiet strength, but there was a subtle change now. His movements measured more carefully, his breath slightly shorter between steps. The recent strain on his heart had not left him unchanged. His silver hair caught the evening light, and the lines in his face seemed deeper, as though time had pressed its fingers more firmly into him these past days. "You came back," Rowan said. Ryan nodded. "Told you I would." There was no tension in his voice this time, only clarity. For a moment, none of them moved. The air between them held something fragile, like the final seconds before a storm, or before peace. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the red rubber ball. It looked small in his hand, almost insignificant, but Max noticed immediately. The dog's posture shifted, not forward, not eager, but alert in a way that suggested recognition buried deep in instinct and memory. Ryan lowered himself slowly, one knee touching the ground, not as a command, not as dominance, as invitation. He placed the ball gently on the ground in front of him and rested his hands loosely on his thigh, his broad shoulders relaxing for the first time since he had arrived in Alder Creek. "I'm not taking you," he said quietly, his voice steady but low. "Not like that." The words were not for Rowan. They were not even fully for Max. They were for the part of himself that had spent 3 years believing that finding meant reclaiming. Rowan watched from the porch, saying nothing. Max looked at the ball, then at Ryan, then back toward Rowan. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of everything. Ryan felt it in his chest like a slow tightening, not panic, not fear, understanding. Time stretched. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the faint scent of water and pine. Max took a step forward, then stopped. His gaze returned to Rowan. The older man didn't move toward him, didn't call him, didn't reach out. He simply stood there, one hand resting against the porch rail, his expression unreadable, but his stillness spoke louder than any command ever could. He was letting the dog choose. Ryan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the open air. His fingers tightened slightly against his knee, then relaxed again. He had faced enemies before. This was harder, because there was no enemy here. Only love, in 2 directions. Max took another step, closer now. The space between them shortened, but not enough to bridge the distance inside. Halfway. That was where the dog stopped. Not unsure, balanced. Ryan could see it clearly now, the shift in Max's eyes. Not confusion, not fear, conflict. And in that moment, Ryan understood something he had not allowed himself to admit before. Max hadn't been waiting. He had moved on, not away from Ryan, but toward something else, something real, something earned. Max turned suddenly and trotted back toward the porch. Ryan's chest tightened, but he didn't move. The dog reached Rowan and pressed briefly against his leg, a quiet, grounding contact that carried familiarity and trust. Rowan's hand lowered instinctively, resting on the dog's head, fingers brushing through the thick fur with a touch that was both gentle and practiced. Then, Max pulled away. He turned again, and this time he ran, not back to Rowan, but toward Ryan. Fast, direct, certain. Ryan barely had time to react before the weight of the dog hit him, knocking him slightly off balance. His hands came up instinctively, gripping into fur, holding, not tightly, not possessively, but with something raw and unguarded. Max pressed into him, body trembling with energy that had been held back too long. A low sound escaped the dog's throat, not a bark, not a whine, but something deeper. Recognition, finally breaking through. Ryan's composure cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. He closed his eyes, his forehead pressing briefly against the dog's neck, breath unsteady for the first time since he had stepped into that clearing days ago. "Hey, hey," he murmured. Behind them, Rowan stood still, watching. The moment stretched, then settled. Max didn't pull away, but he didn't stay locked in place either. After a few seconds, he stepped back, turning his head toward Rowan again, not leaving, not choosing fully, standing between. Ryan noticed it immediately. The truth didn't hurt less, but it hurt differently now. He rose slowly to his feet, his tall frame straightening as he looked from Max to Rowan. "I'm not taking him away from you," Ryan said. Rowan nodded once. "I know." "He's coming with me," Ryan added after a pause. "But he's not leaving you." Rowan's expression softened, just slightly. "That's the only way this works," he said. Ryan glanced down at Max. The dog stood between them, steady, calm, not torn, connected. Ryan reached down, resting his hand briefly against Max's head. No command followed, no leash, just presence. For the first time since the journey began, Ryan didn't feel like he was chasing something lost. He felt like he was building something new. And as the last light of day faded over Alder Creek, the three of them stood in quiet understanding. Some bonds are not broken by time. They are simply reshaped. The early autumn sun rose slowly over Alder Creek, spilling soft amber light across the lake, as if the world itself had decided to move more gently. Ryan Carter stood on the porch of a small weathered house at the edge of town, a place that had once been forgotten, but now showed signs of quiet repair. The wooden boards had been reinforced, the railing sanded down, the roof patched with care rather than haste. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and for Ryan, that mattered more. At 35, he no longer moved like a man chasing something. His shoulders were still broad, his posture still disciplined, but there was a subtle change in the way he carried himself now, less guarded, less braced for impact. His dark brown hair remained short, his jaw still sharp beneath the faint stubble, but his eyes no longer searched the horizon for something lost. They stayed. At his feet, Max lay stretched across the wooden boards, his black and tan coat glowing faintly under the morning light. Age had not diminished him. It had refined him. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds only he could interpret. He was no longer a dog waiting for direction. He was home. Ryan reached down and picked up the old red rubber ball, turning it absently in his hand before tossing it lightly across the yard. Max didn't move at first. He watched it. Then, with deliberate calm, he stood, trotted forward, and picked it up. Not with urgency, not with excitement, but with a quiet understanding. He brought it back and dropped it near Ryan's boot, then settled down again, closer this time, not performing, choosing. A soft knock came from the side of the porch. Ryan glanced up. June Whitaker stood there, a small basket resting against her hip. She wore a light denim jacket over a pale dress, her ash-brown hair loosely tied, a few strands escaping in the morning breeze. Her posture was relaxed, but there was always something attentive in her presence, as if she noticed things most people missed. "I figured you'd be out here," she said, stepping up onto the porch. Ryan gave a small nod. Seems like a good place to start the day. June smiled faintly, setting the basket down on a nearby table. Inside were fresh bread, wrapped neatly, and a small jar of homemade jam. You say that like you've decided to have more of them, she replied. Ryan glanced out toward the lake, then back at Max. Yeah, he said. I think I have. There was no grand declaration in his tone, just certainty. June followed his gaze, watching Max for a moment. He looks different, she said. Ryan tilted his head slightly. How? Settled, she answered. Not like he belongs somewhere. More like he knows he does. Ryan let that sit for a second. That makes two of us, he said quietly. Later that morning, the sound of tires crunching along the gravel path announced another visitor. Rowan Hale stepped out of his old truck slowly, his movement still careful, but more stable than before. He wore a thick flannel shirt despite the mild weather, the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, revealing the same steady hands that had once nursed a dying dog back to life. His silver hair was slightly wind-tousled, his beard catching the light in uneven strands, but his eyes, clear, focused, remained unchanged. Max was already on his feet. The moment Rowan appeared, the dog moved. Not rushed, not frantic, but purposeful. He crossed the yard and stopped in front of the older man, tail low but steady, head lifting slightly as Rowan's hand came down to meet him. No words passed between them. None were needed. Ryan watched from the porch, arms resting loosely at his sides. There was no tension in him now, no instinct to step forward or claim space, only a quiet acknowledgement of something that no longer needed to be resolved. Rowan glanced up at him. Looks like he's keeping you busy, he said. Ryan smirked faintly. He's got opinions. Rowan nodded. Good. Means he's thinking. Max returned to the porch after a few moments, settling once again near Ryan's feet, but not before glancing back at Rowan, as if marking the distance, measuring it, understanding it. June stepped forward, offering Rowan a polite nod. You must be the man who kept him alive. Rowan gave a short shrug. He did most of that himself. June studied him briefly, her gaze perceptive but kind. Still takes someone to stay, she said. Rowan didn't respond to that directly. He simply walked toward the porch, pausing at the bottom step. Ryan stepped down to meet him. For a moment, the two men stood face to face, not as rivals, not as strangers, but as something more complicated and far more human. House suits you, Rowan said. Ryan glanced back at it, then nodded. I think I'll keep it. Rowan's eyes shifted slightly, taking in the repaired boards, the quiet order, the absence of anything temporary. Good, he said. They stood there a while longer, the silence between them no longer heavy. Behind them, Max lay between the porch and the yard, positioned not in the shadow of one life or the other, but in the space that connected both. The wind moved gently across the lake, carrying the faint scent of water and wood, and something else, something softer. Time, perhaps. Ryan leaned against the porch railing, one hand resting lightly against the worn wood, the other dropping absently near Max's head. The dog didn't look up, but shifted slightly closer, as if acknowledging the touch without needing to respond. No one said it out loud, but it was there. The search was over, not because something had been found, but because something had been understood. And as the morning unfolded into something warm and steady, Alder Creek no longer felt like a place Ryan had passed through. It felt like somewhere he had arrived. Sometimes, what we lose is not taken from us. It is guided somewhere we cannot yet understand. Ryan thought he was searching for a dog, but in truth, he was being led back to something greater. Healing, forgiveness, and a home he didn't know he still deserved. In quiet ways, God works through the paths we resist, through the time we think is wasted, and even through the pain we cannot explain. Max was never just lost. He was protected, shaped, and returned at the exact moment Ryan was ready to receive him, not as possession, but as a blessing. In our own lives, we often chase answers, thinking we must control the outcome. But sometimes, the miracle is not in getting things back the way they were. It is in learning to accept what they have become. God does not always restore what we lost. He gives us something deeper: peace, purpose, and the strength to let love grow in new ways. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about what you believe in, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us that miracles still happen, often in the quietest moments. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide your path with light and grace.